did he know it was the beginning of the end? When he sang those words, was he thinking of a specific moment he let slip away? Or was he mourning a thousand tiny failures all at once? The song wasn't his, but the story was. A man who had everything, a king in a self-made kingdom, suddenly realizing he had lost the one thing that mattered. And all he could do was sing about it. This is about why that song, a simple apology set to music, is the most tragic recording of his entire life. Number 15, why does this song hurt more today than it did in 1972? Elvis's version of Always on My Mind only reached number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in the United States. In the UK, it peaked at number 9. Willie Nelson's version, released a decade later, won 3 Grammy Awards, including Song of the Year. The Pet Shop Boys synth pop cover went to number 1 in the UK for 4 weeks in 1987. These are just facts. They show the song had a life far beyond Elvis. But they don't explain why his version feels like a ghost in the room. The reason it's more tragic now is because we know the rest of the story. In 1972, it was a sad song from a superstar going through a public separation. It was topical, people heard it and thought about Elvis and Priscilla splitting up. They heard the regret in his voice. They felt a human connection to a man who often seemed larger than life. But it was a moment in time. There was still a future. There was still a chance, however small, that things could be fixed. That he and Priscilla could reconcile. That he could find a different path. The song in 1972 contained a sliver of hope. An apology is the first step toward forgiveness. Today, we hear it with the weight of the 5 years that followed. We know there was no reconciliation. We know he fell deeper into isolation and prescription drug dependency. We know the sparkle of the '68 comeback special was fading, replaced by the punishing routine of Las Vegas. We know his health was deteriorating. We know he died on a bathroom floor at the age of 42. We know the end of the story. So when he sings, maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have, we don't just hear him talking about Priscilla. We hear a man taking stock of his entire life. We hear the regret of a man who got trapped inside his own legend. He was Elvis Presley, the icon, and that icon was a cage. He couldn't just go to the store. He couldn't have a normal argument with his wife. He couldn't escape the demands of his manager, his fans, his own image. The tragedy is amplified by what came after. Other artists sang the song. Willie Nelson's version is gentle and wise, the reflection of an older man looking back with a peaceful sigh. It's beautiful. The Pet Shop Boys version is electronic and detached, a dance track that ironically masks the song's raw emotion. It's clever, but Elvis's version is an open wound. It's not a reflection, it's a raw, immediate confession. When we listen now, we hear the finality. He sings, tell me that your sweet love hasn't died, not as a question, but as a desperate plea against a truth he already knows. He knows it's over. The song wasn't a hit on the scale of his 50s smashes or even Suspicious Minds. It was a modest success, but its emotional impact has grown over the decades because our understanding of his life has deepened. It's no longer just a song about a breakup. It's the sound of a man realizing, perhaps for the first time, that he is truly irreversibly alone. We are not just listening to a recording. We are eavesdropping on a man's soul at the very moment it begins to break. And we know it will never be whole again. That knowledge makes it unbearable. Number 14, what did his inner circle think when they heard it? Red West, Elvis's longtime friend and bodyguard, wrote the song that was supposed to be the A-side, Separate Ways. He wrote it about his own divorce. The recording session on March 29, 1972 was a heavy one. Everyone in RCA's Studio C in Hollywood knew Elvis and Priscilla had separated just weeks earlier. The air was thick with unspoken truths. These weren't just musicians and a producer. These were men who had been with Elvis for years. They knew him. When Elvis chose to record Always on My Mind, a song brought to the session by Red, it wasn't just another track to fill an album. It was a statement the members of his band, the TCB band, were professionals. James Burton on guitar, Ronnie Tutt on drums, Jerry Sheff on bass. They played what Elvis wanted, but they were also human beings. They could feel the shift in the room. This wasn't the rock and roll Elvis. This wasn't the gospel Elvis. This was someone they had rarely seen in a studio. It was a man stripped of his armor. Priscilla herself has said that when she heard the song, she understood. It was his message to her, a message he couldn't deliver in person. Their conversations by that point were strained, logistical. The song was his true confession. It was his way of saying everything he was incapable of saying face to face. He wasn't a man who was good with direct emotional confrontation. He often used other people's songs to speak his own heart. But this time was different. The performance was so fragile, so devoid of his usual bravado, that it was unmistakable. Felton Jarvis, his producer, had the difficult job of capturing this vulnerability without exploiting it. He had to guide a man who was emotionally shattered through a recording session. The session logs show they did multiple takes. This wasn't a one-and-done performance. Elvis was working at it, trying to get the feeling right. He was living the lyric in real time. The musicians would have felt that. The repetition of that pain, take after take. His friends, the so-called Memphis Mafia, saw the reality behind the song. They saw him alone at Graceland. They saw him trying to fill the void left by Priscilla and Lisa Marie. They knew the song was not a performance. It was a documentary. Red West hearing, Elvis sing a song about regret right after they recorded his own song about the finality of a split must have felt the immense weight of that evening. They were two friends on two sides of the same heartbreak, using music to process it because they couldn't do it any other way. When those closest to him heard the final track, they didn't just hear a potential hit. They heard their friend, their boss, their king admitting defeat. They heard a man famous for his confident sound, utterly lost. For the world, it was a beautiful, sad song. For his inner circle, it was a terrifyingly honest cry for help. It was the sound of the world he had built around himself beginning to crumble. Number 13 was this a rare moment of true artistic expression. Elvis Presley sold over 1 billion records, but he wrote almost none of his own songs. He was an interpreter, a stylist, a vocal genius who could take someone else's words and make them his own. But for much of his career, especially in the 1960s, he was at the mercy of his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, and the Hollywood machine. He was forced to sing songs he hated for movies he despised, songs like Do the Clam or There's No Room to Roomba in a sports car. His creative input was often minimal. He would show up, do his job with as much professionalism as he could muster, and leave. The '68 comeback special changed that for a moment. It was a blast of pure, raw Elvis. He was back in control, singing music he loved, and it showed. It was a massive artistic and commercial success, but by 1972, the old patterns were creeping back in. The Colonel had him locked into a lucrative but soul-crushing schedule in Las Vegas. The pressure was immense. The choice of material was often safe, designed to please a Vegas crowd. The recording session in March 1972 was different. It was booked on the fly. It was a direct response to a personal crisis. This wasn't about fulfilling a movie soundtrack obligation or creating a product for the Vegas stage. This was about a man needing to sing. He wasn't just an entertainer in that studio. He was an artist using his medium to process his pain. Think about the context. The Beatles had broken up. The Rolling Stones were making Exile on Main State. Singer-songwriters like James Taylor and Joni Mitchell dominated the charts, writing deeply personal, introspective music. Elvis was, in some ways, a man out of time. He was a 50s icon navigating a 70s world. He wasn't a confessional songwriter. But with Always on My Mind, he became one. He didn't write the words, but he wrote the emotion. The original version of the song, written by Johnny Christopher, Mark James, and Wayne Carson, is a fine song. Brenda Lee's 1972 version is good, but they don't have the same devastating impact. Elvis's performance is a complete reinterpretation. He slows it down, he strips it bare, he lets his voice crack with emotion. He's not just singing the words, he's living them. This wasn't Colonel Parker's idea. This wasn't a calculated career move. This was a moment of pure, unvarnished expression. A moment when the personal turmoil was so great that it overwhelmed the commercial machine. For 3.5 minutes, he wasn't a product. He was just a man who had messed up, who was full of regret, and who was using the only tool he had to say so. The tragedy lies in how rare these moments were. He had the voice, he had the soul, he had the interpretive genius to be one of the most profound artists of his generation. But he was trapped by contracts, by his manager's greed, by his own inability to break free. Always on My Mind is a glimpse of the artist he could have been if he had been allowed to be. It's a flash of authentic brilliance in a career that was increasingly becoming a pantomime of his former self. The song is tragic not just for its subject matter, but for what it represents, a fleeting moment of artistic freedom in a life of creative confinement. Number 12, Can You Hear His Health Failing in His Voice? By March 1972, Elvis was 37 years old. He was not the withered, bloated figure of his final years. He was still handsome, still powerful on stage. But the seeds of his physical decline had been sown. Years of a bizarre diet, a lack of real exercise, and a growing dependence on prescription drugs were beginning to take their toll. This wasn't just an emotional crisis, it was happening inside a body that was starting to betray him. Listen to his voice on Always on My Mind. It's different from the voice on Jailhouse Rock or even Suspicious Minds. The raw power is still there, but it's tempered with a fragility, a weariness that goes beyond the sadness of the lyrics. It's a tired voice, not tired in a lazy way, but in a soul, deep, bone, weary way. There's a slight huskiness, a breathiness in the quieter passages that wasn't there before. When he sings the line, I guess I never told you, his voice is barely more than a whisper. It's a choice, of course. An artistic choice to convey intimacy and regret. But it also sounds like a man who is running out of energy. The sustained notes don't have the same effortless projection of his earlier work. There's a strain, a tension in the high notes that sounds less like power and more like desperation. Compare it to his performances from the '68 comeback special, less than 4 years earlier. In 1968, he was lean, hungry, and his voice was a weapon. It was sharp, clear, and full of fight. On Always on My Mind, his voice is a wounded thing. It's softer, more vulnerable, and carries the weight of the physical stress he was under. The lifestyle of a Las Vegas headliner was brutal. The schedule was relentless, 2 shows a night for weeks on end. To get up for the shows, he took stimulants. To come down after the shows, he took sleeping pills. His diet was notoriously poor. His sleep schedule was completely reversed. He slept all day and lived at night. This unnatural existence wreaks havoc on a human body. The emotional turmoil of his separation from Priscilla would have exacerbated any physical issues. Stress floods the body with cortisol. It disrupts sleep, affects appetite, and weakens the immune system. He was a man in immense emotional pain, living in a body that was under constant chemical and physical stress. You can hear that combination in the recording. The sadness is obvious, but listen closer and you can hear the physical cost of his life. The slight tremor in his voice is not just vibrato. It's the sound of a nervous system frayed by pills and a lack of real rest. The weariness is not just an act, it's the genuine fatigue of a man whose body was starting a slow, painful rebellion. The song is a snapshot of his emotional state, yes, but it is also an auditory document of his physical decline. It is the sound of a man beginning to come apart, both emotionally and physically. It's number 11. Did Elvis turn a simple love song into a eulogy? The original song, Always on My Mind, was written in 1970. Wayne Carson, one of the songwriters, said he wrote it in about 10 minutes at his kitchen table in Springfield, Missouri. He was on the phone with his wife, apologizing for being distant, and the phrase, "You were always on my mind," came to him. It was a straightforward song of apology and reassurance. When Brenda Lee recorded it in 1972, it was a sweet country politan ballad. It's a song about a relationship that is salvageable. It's a plea to fix things. Elvis Presley did not sing it that way. He took the same words, the same melody, and transformed it into something entirely different. In his hands, it is no longer a song of apology. It is a eulogy. He is mourning a love that is already dead. The key is in the delivery. Where Brenda Lee's version has a hopeful lilt, Elvis's is steeped in a profound and irreversible sadness. The tempo is slower, almost funereal. The piano that opens the track is sparse and somber, like church bells tolling for a loss. The backing vocals are hushed and respectful, like a choir at a memorial service. They are there to support his grief, not to lift him out of it. Listen to how he sings the line, "Tell me that your sweet love hasn't died." He sings it with a sense of utter hopelessness. He knows it has died. He is just begging to be lied to. It is the bargaining stage of grief, acted out in a recording studio. There is no hope of reconciliation in his voice. There is only the sound of a man standing at a graveside, talking to a memory. He is not just mourning the end of his marriage to Priscilla. He is mourning the man he failed to be. Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have. Maybe I didn't love you quite as often as I could have. These are not excuses, they are confessions. They are the words of a man looking back from the ruins of his life, realizing every mistake he made along the way. The song's structure, in his version, mimics the process of grief. The verses are quiet, introspective, full of whispered regrets. And the chorus swells, a great wave of pain and loss, before receding back into quiet despair. It's the sound of a man trying to hold it together and failing. By stripping the song of all its original hope, Elvis made it infinitely more tragic. It's not a song about saving a relationship. It's a song about having to live with the knowledge that you are the one who destroyed it. He turned a simple, "I'm sorry," into a permanent monument to his own failure. He sings it like a man who knows he will be alone forever and that it is entirely his own fault. It is a eulogy for his marriage, for his family, and for the better man he never became. Number 10. Was he singing about more than just one woman? On the surface, Always on My Mind is clearly about Priscilla. The timing of the recording just weeks after their separation on February 23rd, 1972, makes that interpretation undeniable. This was his direct personal message to her. But the tragedy of the song deepens when you consider that he might have been singing about a much larger, more profound sense of loss. Elvis Presley was one of the most famous people in the world. He was surrounded by people constantly. His entourage, the Memphis Mafia, lived with him. Fans mobbed him everywhere he went. He was never physically alone, but he was profoundly lonely. He lived in a gilded cage, whether it was Graceland or a Las Vegas hotel suite. His reality was completely distorted. The song is a lament for neglected love. Little things I should have said and done, I just never took the time. This could apply to Priscilla, of course, but it could also be a lament for a life he never got to live. He never took the time to be a normal person. He never took the time to have real friends outside of his payroll. He never took the time to develop hobbies or interests that weren't tied to his fame. He never took the time to just be Vernon Presley's son. The line "You Were Always on My Mind" could be interpreted as him singing to a lost version of himself. The young, hungry kid from Tupelo who loved his mother and just wanted to sing. That person was still in there, somewhere, buried under the jumpsuits, the pills, the fame, the money. He had neglected that person. He hadn't treated that part of himself quite as good as I should have. He had traded his authentic self for a public image, and by 1972, he was realizing what a terrible bargain he had made. Think of his mother, Gladys. She died in 1958, at the age of 46, while he was in the army. He adored her, but his skyrocketing fame in the years before her death had completely changed their relationship. He was away, busy, consumed by his career. He was filled with a lifelong guilt over her death. Little things I should have said and done. How could that not apply to his feelings about his mother? He was a man haunted by regret, and it extended far beyond his marriage. The song becomes a confession of a much broader failure. A failure to connect. A failure to be present. A failure to nurture the things that truly matter. Family, selfhood, a sense of normalcy. He was singing to Priscilla, yes. But he was also singing to his lost youth, his lost privacy, his lost mother, his lost self. He was the king of rock and roll, but he was the ruler of a lonely, empty kingdom. The song is the sound of the king finally admitting that his crown was a sham and his castle was a prison. Number 9, did he trade Hollywood dreams for a lonely reality? The 1960s were for Elvis the movie years. He made 27 movies between 1960 and 1969. The dream initially was to be a serious actor like his idols James Dean and Marlon Brando. His early dramatic roles in films like King Creole, 1958, showed real promise. But Colonel Tom Parker saw the movies not as an art form, but as a low-risk way to make enormous amounts of money. The formula was simple: a few songs, a few fights, a pretty girl, and an exotic location. The quality of the scripts and songs plummeted. By the late 1960s, Elvis was miserable. He openly detested the films and the formulaic, terrible songs he was forced to sing in them. The films had made him rich, but they had nearly destroyed him creatively. The '68 comeback special was his rebellion. It was him breaking free from the Hollywood shackles and reestablishing himself as a vital, relevant musician. You know, it worked. He was back on top. But what came next? He traded the Hollywood soundstage for the Las Vegas stage. On the surface, it seemed like a victory. He was performing live music again, but it quickly became its own kind of prison. The International Hotel, later the Las Vegas Hilton, became his new Hollywood. The schedule was punishing. The audience was different. The creative energy of the '68 special was hard to maintain in the sterile environment of a Vegas showroom. When he recorded Always on My Mind in March 1972, his movie career was officially over. His last fictional film, Change of Habit, had come out in 1969. The documentary Elvis, That's the Way It Is, from 1970, showed him preparing for his Vegas show, a vibrant and powerful performer. But by 1972, the reality of that choice had set in. He had escaped one trap only to walk into another. The song's lyrics of regret can be read through this lens. Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have. Was he singing about his own talent, his own artistic ambitions? He had allowed the Colonel to sell his dream of being a serious actor for a string of cheap musicals. He had let his musical creativity stagnate for years while he churned out soundtrack albums. He had neglected his own artistic spirit. The tragedy of the song is the sound of a man who got what he wanted, freedom from Hollywood A, only to find it wasn't freedom at all. He was still isolated, he was still creatively constrained by the demands of the Vegas machine, and his personal life was in shambles. He had sacrificed his family life, in part, for a career that now felt like a different kind of dead end. The dream of being a serious actor was long dead. The dream of being a rebellious rock and roller was fading under the Vegas lights. The song is a lament for all those abandoned dreams. It's the sound of a man who fought his way out of one prison, only to find himself in another, lonelier one. Number 8. Was this song the only way? He knew how to apologize. Elvis Presley was not a man built for introspection or direct emotional communication. He was raised in a culture where men, especially Southern men, did not discuss their feelings. They acted, they provided, they were strong, vulnerability was weakness. His entire life was a performance of confidence and control, from the swaggering hips of the 50s to the karate kicks of the 70s. When his marriage to Priscilla fell apart, he was ill-equipped to handle it. He couldn't sit down and have a calm, rational conversation about his failings as a husband. According to Priscilla's own accounts, their attempts at communication were fraught with misunderstanding and his own defensive anger. He could not bring himself to say the simple words, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I neglected you," but he could sing them. If music was his language, it was the one place where he could be completely vulnerable, where he could express the deepest parts of his heart without feeling exposed. On stage or in a recording studio, he could let the mask slip. He could channel all his pain, regret, and love into a song. He could borrow someone else's words to say what he was incapable of writing or speaking himself. Always on My Mind was the perfect vehicle. The lyrics were a ready-made apology, a confession he could deliver with complete emotional honesty because it was filtered through the medium of music. It was safer that way. He wasn't Vernon's son admitting he failed. He was Elvis Presley, the singer, performing a sad song. But of course, everyone who knew him knew the difference. The tragedy is profound. Here was a man who could communicate with millions of people through his music, who could make them scream and cry and fall in love. But he could not communicate effectively with the one person who mattered most to him. He had to book a recording studio and hire session musicians to say what a husband should be able to say to his wife over the kitchen table. The song is a monument to his emotional illiteracy. It is beautiful and heartbreaking, but it is also a record of a profound personal failure. The very existence of the recording in this context is tragic. It means that a direct human apology was impossible for him. He had to turn his heartbreak into a product, a piece of vinyl to be sold. It was the only way he knew how to speak. It was less a conversation with Priscilla and more a broadcast to the world, hoping she would be listening. It was a grand, public gesture from a man incapable of a small, private one. Number 7. Did the failure of the single make the song even sadder? In the music business, an A-side is the song the record company believes has the most commercial potential. It's the song they push to radio stations. The B-side is often an afterthought, a contractual obligation, or a more experimental track. In November 1972, RCA Records released the single Separate Ways, with Always on My Mind on the B-side. Separate Ways, written by Red West and Johnny Christopher, was the obvious choice for the A-side. It was an up-tempo, dramatic song that directly addressed the theme of a breakup. It was a piece of commercial country pop, perfectly suited for the radio of the day. Always on My Mind was slower, more somber, more introspective. It was a downer. RCA bet on the more commercial song. The single Separate Ways was only a moderate success. It peaked at number 20 on the Billboard Hot 100. It did better on the adult contemporary chart, reaching number 3. But it was not a smash hit. It certainly wasn't the comeback smash that Suspicious Minds had been 3 years earlier. The record, as a commercial product, underperformed. This commercial failure adds another layer of tragedy to Always on My Mind. Elvis had poured his heart out in the studio. He had delivered one of the most honest, vulnerable performances of his career. And it was relegated to the B-side. It was treated as the less important song. His most profound personal statement was, in the eyes of his record label, a throwaway. Imagine the message that sends. You strip yourself bare, you confess your deepest regrets, and the commercial machine you're a part of says, "That's nice, but this other song is catchier." It's a complete invalidation of his emotional outpouring. It reduces his genuine pain to a piece of product that was deemed commercially inferior. The fact that Always on My Mind has endured, becoming one of his most iconic and beloved ballads, while Separate Ways is largely a footnote, is a historical irony. But in the moment, in 1972, the release strategy was a clear statement. The business of Elvis Presley took precedence over the soul of Elvis Presley. His pain was packaged, marketed, and ultimately misjudged. The song's status as a B-side makes it feel like a secret, a hidden confession that you had to flip the record over to find. It's as if his real feelings were deemed not suitable for mass consumption. The tragedy, then, is not just in the song itself, but in how it was treated. His most authentic moment of the decade was literally pushed to the back. It's a perfect metaphor for how his true self was so often hidden behind the commercial demands of his career. Number 6, why was his most personal statement hidden on a B-side? The decision to make Always on My Mind the B-side to Separate Ways was a commercial one made by RCA Records, likely with the approval of Colonel Tom Parker. And it speaks volumes about the machine that surrounded Elvis. The Colonel was a master marketer, but he was not a man who dealt in emotional nuance. He dealt in what sold. A song about the finality of a breakup, Separate Ways, was seen as more dramatic and thus more commercial than a song of quiet, personal regret. This decision reflects a fundamental misunderstanding, or perhaps a deliberate ignoring, of what made Elvis great. His power was always in his ability to convey raw, authentic emotion. But by 1972, the Elvis brand was about something else. It was about jumpsuits, karate, and grand, bombastic stage shows. It was about being an untouchable icon, a living legend. A song like Always on My Mind flew in the face of that image. It was too human. It was the sound of a king admitting his crown was heavy, and he had failed the person he was supposed to protect. It was a song of weakness, of fallibility. This was not the image the Colonel was selling. The brand was about strength, success, and spectacle. A quiet, heartbreaking ballad about personal failure didn't fit the marketing plan, so they hit it. Placing it on the B-side was a way to fulfill the recording contract without leading with a song that was so nakedly vulnerable. It was a strategic move to protect the brand. The tragedy here is immense. Elvis's moment of greatest artistic and personal honesty was deemed a commercial risk. The very thing that makes the song so powerful and enduring its raw humanity was the thing that made the business people nervous. This decision also highlights Elvis's lack of control over his own career. A different artist, a singer-songwriter of the era, would have fought to have their most personal song be the A-side. But Elvis was not in that position. He was a cog in a machine that he had helped create, but no longer controlled. He did the work in the studio, he poured his soul into the microphone, and then he handed it over to others to package and sell as they saw fit. Hiding the song on the B-side was an act of emotional censorship. It was a message from the business to the artist: your pain is not the product, your performance is. The song became a secret handshake for true fans, a hidden gem that revealed more about the man than any of his bigger hits from that era. It is the ultimate tragic irony. The song that best defined the real man was the one they tried to hide from the world. Number 5. What really happened in the studio on March 29th, 1972? The recording session at RCA Studio C in Hollywood began at 7 p.m. It was not a typical session, it was hastily arranged. Elvis was in a dark place. His separation from Priscilla just a month before was the backdrop for everything. He wasn't there to make a hit record. He was there to, work through his pain. The atmosphere in the studio was somber. The usual playful banter was absent. Elvis was focused, withdrawn. The first song they worked on was Separate Ways. And Red West, who co-wrote it, was there. The song was about divorce. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. Elvis sang it with a professional detachment. It was a song about a situation, but it wasn't a confession. And then they moved on to Christopherson's For the Good Times. It's another song about the end of a relationship, but it has a wistful, almost gentle sense of resignation. Elvis's version is beautiful, but it's a performance. He's inhabiting a character. The emotional centerpiece of the night was Always on My Mind. When Elvis decided to cut this track, the mood in the studio shifted. This one was different. This wasn't about a generic breakup. This was his story. The musicians felt it. Ronnie Tutt, the drummer, played with a subtle, restrained touch. The arrangement was built around Elvis's voice and the simple piano part. There was a sense that everyone in the room knew they were witnessing something intensely personal. They worked on it for hours, take after take. Elvis was not just trying to get the notes right, he was trying to get the emotion right. He was digging deep. People who were there described him as being almost in a trance. He was living inside the song. He would sing a line, stop, shake his head, and start again. It was a painful, meticulous process. The session didn't end until after 3 a.m. 8 hours of immersion in heartbreak. 3 songs, all about loss. It was a therapy session set to music. The producer, Felton Jarvis, had the delicate task of capturing this raw emotion without letting the session fall apart. He had to be a technician and a psychologist at the same time. What happened in that studio was not just the creation of a record. It was the documentation of a man's grief. He used the sterile professional environment of a recording studio to have an emotional breakdown. He surrounded himself with his trusted musicians, his work family, to confess his sins because he couldn't do it to his real family. The recording of Always on My Mind wasn't a job. It was an exorcism. And the final track is a chillingly clear recording of that painful process. Number 4, how did he make someone else's words his own confession? The song Always on My Mind was written by Wayne Carson, Johnny Christopher, and Mark James. Mark James had also written Suspicious Minds, so there was a connection to Elvis's world. But the words were not Elvis's. He didn't write a single line. And yet, it is impossible to hear the song and not believe it is his own personal testimony. How did he achieve this? It comes down to interpretive genius. Elvis was one of the greatest vocal stylists of the 20th century. He didn't just sing a melody, he inhabited it. He could find the emotional core of a lyric and amplify it with his phrasing, his tone, and his timing. With Always on My Mind, he performed a kind of emotional alchemy. First, he changed the song's perspective. The original intent was apologetic but hopeful. It was a song for the living. Elvis sings it as a song for the dead. He slows the tempo to a crawl. This forces the listener to hang on every word. The space between the phrases is filled with an unspoken sadness. The slowness turns the lyrics from a quick apology into a heavy, considered confession. Second, his phrasing is masterful. Listen to the line, "Maybe I didn't hold you." He puts a slight, almost imperceptible break in his voice. A catch of breath. It's the sound of a man on the verge of tears. When he sings the chorus, "You were always on my mind," it's not a statement of fact. It's a cry of anguish. He stretches the word mind, his voice full of a desperate vibrato. It's the sound of regret. Third, he strips away all artifice. There is no rock and roll swagger here, no Vegas glitz. It is one of the most nakedly emotional vocal performances of his career. He is not performing for an audience. He seems to be singing to himself or to a ghost. The microphone picks up every subtle nuance, every breath, every tremor in his voice. It's an intimate performance, almost uncomfortably so. We feel like we are intruding on a private moment of grief. The tragedy is that this incredible interpretive gift was so often wasted on subpar material. When given a lyric that resonated with his own life, he could transform it into something transcendent. He took a well-crafted pop song and turned it into a profound work of art simply by telling his own truth through it. He didn't need to write the words because his life was the context. His pain was the ink. The song was just the paper he wrote it on. He made it his own by bleeding all over it. Number 3, did this song expose the man behind the jumpsuit? By 1972, Elvis Presley was as much a caricature as he was a person. The public image was of the Las Vegas superstar in the white jumpsuit. He was a superhero of entertainment. He was powerful, magnetic, and completely in control on stage. He was larger than life, an American icon who seemed to exist on a different plane from ordinary people. The jumpsuits, the capes, the karate moves, it was all part of a carefully constructed myth, a myth of untouchable superhuman coolness. Always on My Mind shatters that myth. For 3.5 minutes, the jumpsuit vanishes. The superhero cape falls to the floor. The icon becomes a man. A flawed, heartbroken, deeply human man. The song is a direct contradiction of the public image he and Colonel Parker had so carefully cultivated. The Elvis on stage in Vegas was a peacock, all swagger and spectacle. The Elvis singing Always on My Mind is a man on his knees. The contrast is jarring. The public persona was about giving the audience what they wanted: excitement, fantasy, a larger-than-life experience. The song was about giving himself what he needed, a moment of pure, unvarnished honesty. The song exposed the immense gap between the public Elvis and the private Elvis. The public Elvis was surrounded by adoring fans. The private Elvis was devastatingly lonely. The public Elvis was the king. The private Elvis was a man who had lost his queen and his princess. The song revealed that the king was just a man in a costume, and that underneath the costume he was hurting. The tragedy is that this revelation was so rare. For the most part, he kept the mask on. He continued the shows. He continued to play the part of Elvis Presley, the superstar. Always on My Mind is a crack in the facade. It's a glimpse into the profound sadness and regret that the public image was designed to conceal. It humanized him in a way that few other things did. It showed that the king could fail, the king could feel regret, the king could have his heart broken. For an artist whose image was built on an idea of God like perfection, this admission of humanity was a radical act. It was also a deeply tragic one because it revealed the immense personal cost of maintaining that myth. The jumpsuit was not just a costume, it was armor. And this song is the sound of him taking it off for just a moment, revealing the wounds underneath. Number 2, is this the sound of a king losing his queen? The story of Elvis and Priscilla is central to the Elvis myth. He met her when she was just 14. He brought her to live at Graceland. He molded her, in many ways, into his ideal woman. Their wedding in 1967 was a major event. The birth of their daughter Lisa Marie in 1968 seemed to complete the fairy tale. He was the king, she was his queen, and Graceland was their castle. but the reality was far from a fairy tale. Elvis's lifestyle, his infidelity, his emotional distance, and his dependence on his entourage created an impossible environment for a marriage. By late 1971, Priscilla had begun a relationship with her karate instructor, Mike Stone. In early 1972, she told Elvis she was leaving him. The separation shattered him. It was a rejection he had never experienced on that scale. He was Elvis Presley. People didn't leave him. Priscilla was not just his wife. She was a central part of his identity. Her departure was a fundamental challenge to his sense of self. It was a failure that no amount of money or fame could fix. Always on my mind is the direct musical result of this crisis. It is the sound of the king pleading for his queen to return. But it's a plea made with the knowledge that she is already gone. The song is steeped in the specific details of their failed marriage. Little things I should have said and done. This speaks to his emotional neglect, his long absences, his failure to be a present husband and father. The profound tragedy of the song is its impotence. He was one of the most powerful men in entertainment. He could have anything he wanted. He could buy cars, houses, jets. He could sell out any arena in the country. But he could not make his wife love him again. He could not fix what he had broken. All his power, all his fame, all his money was useless in the face of this one simple human failure. The song is a royal abdication. It is the king admitting defeat. He is no longer the confident, in-control ruler of his domain. He is a humbled, broken man surveying the ruins of his personal kingdom. The performance is not a kingly decree. It is the quiet whimper of a man who has lost his center. He would have other relationships, most notably with Linda Thompson, but he would never remarry. In many ways, Priscilla remained the central female figure in his life. The song is a snapshot of the moment he realized she was truly gone. It is the sound of his fairy tale ending. The king was left alone in his castle, and he would remain alone there until the day he died. Number one, was this his goodbye letter to Priscilla? A song can be many things, an entertainment, a product, a work of art, but sometimes a song is a letter. A message that cannot be spoken, so it must be sung. Elvis's recording of Always on My Mind is not just a song about a breakup. It is the breakup. It is his final definitive statement on the end of his marriage. It is his goodbye letter to Priscilla. Think of the things people write in a goodbye letter. They express regret. They admit fault. They try to explain themselves. They often romanticize the past. The lyrics of the song tick every one of these boxes. Maybe I didn't treat you quite as good as I should have. Little things I should have said and done. You were always on my mind. It is a perfect text for a final farewell. But unlike a written letter, which is a private communication, this was a public one. He recorded it for the entire world to hear. This adds a layer of complexity and tragedy. Why make such a private sentiment so public? Perhaps because his entire life was public. He didn't know how to operate in a private space anymore. Or perhaps it was a grand, desperate gesture, a final attempt to win her back by showing the whole world how much he was hurting. But the tone of the song suggests something else. It is not a hopeful song. It is a song of resignation. It feels final. The sadness is so profound, so overwhelming, that it leaves no room for reconciliation. It is not the beginning of a conversation. It is the end of one. It is him closing the book on their life together. The final lines of the song are a desperate plea. Give me one more chance to keep you satisfied. But he sings them with the heartbreaking conviction of a man who knows he will not get that chance. He has already accepted the end. The rest of the song is a postscript, an explanation for a love that has already been lost. This is the ultimate reason the song is so tragic. It is a confession of failure, a plea for forgiveness, and a statement of goodbye, all rolled into one. It is a document of the most significant personal failure of his life, set to music and preserved forever. He couldn't write the letter himself, so he found one someone else had written and signed it with his voice. And in doing so, he created the most beautiful, heartbreaking, and tragic recording of his entire career. It was the sound of his heartbreaking captured on magnetic tape for the whole world to hear over and over again.